Many of you are probably aware that I have been distracted somewhat in recent weeks. My father has been in various facilities because of health difficulties, various stages of emergency. And if that has impacted my work, I apologize for that. Uh, it's been an interesting month, to put it mildly. Your prayers are appreciated. I will tell you, quite frankly, Psalm 88 has come to my mind more than once. It's one of many psalms that addresses the plight of the Christian who is in, well, to put it mildly, hardship, difficulty, pain, suffering, etc. It's oftentimes referred to as the saddest psalm of them all. Out of the 150, it's the saddest. I think you may get an idea why as we read through it here in a second. And I don't want to give the impression here that our situation with Dad is desperate. I would not use that word at all. His health is showing some signs of recovery, and we're grateful for that. But even if it showed no signs at all, desperate wouldn't apply because he's a man of faith, and we believe that heaven waits for those who live their lives in service to him and to his cause, and that's what Dad has done. I truly believe that. So we're not desperate at all. But there is certainly a sense, more of a short-term planet Earth sense, in which things can look desperate. We can get so overwhelmed with the hardships, difficulties, pain, and suffering that this world offers, and sometimes doesn't relent in, that we feel completely abandoned. We may even lash out at God as a result of this. We may see God as the problem rather than the source of solutions. And it's appropriate for us to look at Psalm 88 and consider what it has to offer us. Perhaps not with regard to comfort precisely, but more in line with dealing with circumstances as they exist rather than the way we wish they would exist. God doesn't respond to our prayers in the way that we oftentimes wish. At least sometimes he doesn't. And we know how to cope. We need to know how to cope with that. Anyway, I'm going to read from the CSB, the Christian Standard Bible here, in Psalm 88. It's a song, a psalm of the sons of Korah for the choir director, according to Miloth Lenoth, a maskil of Heman the Ezrahite. Lord, God of my salvation, I cry out before you day and night. May my prayer reach your presence. Listen to me cry. For I have had enough troubles, and my life is near Sheol. I'm counted among those going down to the pit. I'm like a man without strength, abandoned among the dead. I'm like the slain lying in the grave, whom you no longer remember, and who are cut off from your care. You have put me in the lowest part of the pit, in the darkest places, in the depths. Your wrath weighs heavily on me. You have overwhelmed me with all of your waves. You have distanced my friends from me. You have made me repulsive to them. I am shut out and cannot go out. My eyes are worn out from crying. Lord, I cry out to you all day long. I spread my hands out to you. Do you work wonders for the dead? Do departed spirits rise up to praise you? Will your faithful love be declared in the grave, your faithfulness in Abaddon? Will your wonders be known in the darkness, or your righteousness in the land of oblivion? But I call to you for help, Lord. In the morning my prayer meets you. Lord, why do you reject me? Why do you hide your face from me? From my youth I've been suffering and near death. I suffer your horrors. I am desperate. Your wrath sweeps over me. Your terrors destroy me. They surround me like water all day long. They close in on me from every side. You have distanced loved one and neighbor from me. Darkness is my only friend. Now, I stopped the reading there, and if you are not acquainted with Psalm 88, you are just about ready for the page to turn, right? Okay, well, that's the bad news. Let's hear the good news. There is no good news. That's what makes Psalm 88 so tragic. That's all there is. It's just lament. It's just complaint. It's just a recitation of difficulties, hardships, problems, many, if not most of which are laid directly at the feet of God. And I know that some people push back against this notion. I get it. Saying that God causes our problems. God causes our hardships. No, God's not the cause of it. God is he's the source of every good and perfect gift. He loves us. He blesses us. It's not God that does the bad things to us. It's Satan that does the bad things to us. Satan does these bad things under the general umbrella of God's oversight. It's within the will of God that these things happen, but it's not God personally who is doing that to us. It's the devil doing that to us. And if that gives you comfort, if that is a blessing to you to think of it in those ways, I would not take that away from you. That is fine. That is certainly biblical, after a fashion at least. To a certain degree it is. I would caution you against building too big of a house on that foundation, because if we want to make that distinction, that's fine, but Psalm 88 is a great example of how the Bible does not always make that distinction. The Bible, the book of Job is another example. There are many other Psalms that do this as well. God is oftentimes seen as the source of problems, the source of hardships. He is blamed for difficulties and problems and setbacks, and God does not go out of his way personally, through the prophets, through the inspired writers, and in any other way, most of these times, to dissuade us of that notion. As far as the Bible is concerned, done under God's auspices and done by God are interchangeable. Now, that does not make God cruel or ugly or mean or unloving at all. I hope that we're in harmony with that. The Bible describes God as being a very loving God. Well, how can it be that a loving God would allow these things, or make these things, however you want to look at it, happen to his people? Why isn't it that God shelters us and protects us? Well, there's a lot of answers to that, not the least of which is he does shelter us. He does protect us. Perhaps not to the degree that you or I would like, perhaps not in the moment where the difficulty, the really bad difficulty, Heman's difficulty is taking place. But one way or the other, God is there for us. And it's noteworthy that the psalmist here emphasizes, first of all, that this prayer is going up to God day and night. I like how it's phrased in Psalm 55, verse 17. The CSB says, morning, noon, and night, I lift up my voice. I complain to God. Different versions read a little bit differently there, but God listens to us. And that's not saying there that you have a biblical pattern. You must pray to God 3 times. I think or limit yourself to 3 prayers as far as that goes. I think it's more just a generalization. My prayers are always going up to God because I'm always having problems. I'm always struggling. I'm always in pain, and maybe in some kind of specific pain. Maybe it is a health issue. Maybe it's a relationship issue that's been going on for weeks or months or years. And every day in that entire time, you have prayed to God, day and night. Avenge me of my adversary. We'll talk about the importunate widow in a moment. Or the 3 times where Paul prayed, asking for the thorn in his flesh to be removed. He got a specific message from Jesus that the thorn was not going to be removed. You or I are not likely to get a message like that. So what do? Well, we can quit God. That's one thing we can do. The psalmist clearly has not done that. That's why he's writing out this psalm, this prayer. Or you can persevere. And maybe your prayers get a little more desperate sounding. Maybe you enlist the help of others to pray with you, pray for you. That's entirely appropriate. But the person of faith is going to be driven to prayer on the regular basis. And I hope that describes me. I hope that describes you, that in your dark days, in these times of hardship, including and particularly when it doesn't look like prayer is going anywhere, when all seems lost, it is always our instinct to pray. We read a story in Acts chapter 27 about Paul and the shipwreck that he endures on his way to Rome. It's kind of piling on, you might say there. He's on his way to prison and perhaps death. And in the meantime, oh, hey, by the way, maybe you won't even make it to Rome. Maybe we'll kill you in the Mediterranean Sea. It's a desperate situation. And I like the phrase there in verse number 29, where in this horrible storm, the text says there that they did what they could in the middle of the night, and then they prayed for daybreak. That's what you call a desperate prayer. If you're praying that the sun comes up in the morning, if I could just survive this night, that's what I really want. Sometimes you've been perhaps in a situation where it looked absolutely desperate, and the thing you wanted more than anything else is just to make it another day. Maybe it's a literal health issue or danger issue. Maybe it is some kind of emotional pain that you're struggling with that feels like it's just as bad or worse than some kind of physical remedy. And you know, there used to be a very famous country music song, "Help Me Make It Through the Night," which I do not recommend necessarily on moral grounds. But what a great prayer that would be to God, not to a woman or a man in some kind of sexual situation. Pray to God, help me make it through the night. If I could just survive another night, right now, that's all I want. That's all I need. Just let me make it through one more time, one more night, one more time to see the sun rise on me and my problems. What a blessing it is that God is there for us in these moments. As when we feel abandoned, we feel like a man without strength, abandoned among the dead. We're lying in the grave. There, the text says in verse number 5. This grave imagery, the Sheol imagery, the pit imagery that we see over and over again, whether it's literal death or not, really doesn't make a whole lot of difference. Sometimes you're in pain and you wish you could die. That would be good news in these situations. And in those moments, the reaction of a person of faith should be to go to God in prayer. And then when things get worse instead of better, you pray again. And again, when things do go bad, when things well beyond your control turn in a negative way, global things, weather things, enemy things, government things, law, whatever, things that are beyond your control, just pile on top of you. And we believe in a God who rules in the universe, a God who is in control. It can seem personal. It's kind of ridiculous when you think about it, right? If 8 billion people on the planet and God allows a government to turn in a certain direction because he has it out for me. That doesn't really sound very reasonable. I'm not quite the center of the universe to that degree. I hope that none of us thinks that way in our saner moments, but in our insaner moments, maybe, sure. God's out to get me here. I just don't understand why God is doing all this to me. Well, you know what? I have bad news for you. You may never understand. You may never come to grips with the reality, the big picture reality of what's going on, because we are limited to three-dimensional vision. God sees differently than we do. To him, a day is as 1,000 years. 1,000 years is one day. And the sufferings of the moment, I'm not trying to say they don't mean anything to God, but they don't mean the same thing to God that they mean to us. They can't mean the same thing because we are limited to time. We see ourselves as having to endure this hardship. And the entire time we're saying with David in Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me? Now, to cut off that conversation, everybody knows that Jesus is going to refer to this psalm on the cross. You follow through in Psalm 22 and you realize that David comes to the conclusion, or else he always knew the conclusion, probably did, whether he acknowledged it or not in the moment, that God did not abandon him, that God is with him in these difficult times. And I hope that you and I in our saner moments can realize that no matter how bad things get, no matter how many opportunities God gets to fix our situation and he passes, or he makes them worse instead of better, that doesn't mean that God has quit on us. And it certainly doesn't mean that we should be quitting on God. We endure. We push through all of these things. And then when we do that, bringing us to maybe the big picture point of Psalm 88 that we get here like no other psalm, because it's so negative, because there's such an absence of joy here. When prayer doesn't work, when we finally get, and maybe this is a health thing as much as anything else, or maybe it's an election thing, whatever, some kind of turn of events, where it becomes obvious that the answer is not yes, and the answer is not wait a little bit longer. The answer is no. You are not going to get what you want. And as many times as you ask, you continue to get the no. Well, it may be a delayed yes, even though it may seem like it's not. It may be God asking you to be even more patient than you were capable or thought you were capable of being in this moment. The importunate widow mentioned before in Luke chapter 18, the woman who goes to the judge over and over and again, avenge me of my adversary. This is the proper approach. He is the official that has power to rule in these situations, going all the way back to Exodus chapter 19 and the government that Moses sets up in the wilderness. There are judges in place, and in our day, in our culture, generally there are judges or similar officials in place where we can go for some measure of appeal. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But what this widow does is she goes back over and over and over again. Now, depending on your form of government, depending on the particular magistrate that may be in place, that may not be the best approach for you to take. And that's not the point, though. This is not a way to properly sue your neighbor. That's not the point of this parable. The point is that we have an ultimate judge, a judge in heaven who is governing all these things that are going around about us. And although he could not be seen as unloving or caring, or certainly not indifferent to God and the things of God, because the judge is God himself, nevertheless, the approach is sound. You continue to go back. You wear him out with your prayers, essentially, You wear him out. And the point is not, I don't think it's biblical, that if you pray a certain number of times, God's patience just kind of wears out and you've worn him down and beaten him up with all of your prayers. Okay, fine, I'll go ahead and do it. That's not the point. The point is, as he says there in verse number 8, when the Lord comes, will he find faith on the earth? Will there be people who are still praying? And the idea of still praying implies that they are not as fortunate as the importunate widow. She prayed and prayed and prayed and finally got what she wanted out of the unrighteous judge. You may not be that lucky as you may define lucky. You may pray and pray and pray for 50 years, 100 years, and never get what you think you're entitled to from the hand of God. What does that mean? Well, clearly it means that God doesn't love me anymore. Well, some people take it that way. A lot of people take it that way. That's a failure of faith. A person who truly believes, though, a person who truly has faith in these Psalm 88 kind of days is going to be able to dig deep and find new reserves of resolve and strength and power and hope. And for those who believe in heaven, for those who believe that there is a life after this one, a reward for the faithful, this should bypass this entire argument. Because ultimately, we're not living for earth, we're living for heaven. And so therefore, whatever we get or do not get in this earth really has nothing to do with heaven. And if our eternity is squared away, then surely our short term here on earth, we can manage whatever that is. So if you believe in heaven, then even more than Heman the Ezrahite, you can continue to pray and pray and pray again. Trust that God will have his way. And by the way, it might help you in these moments to phrase your prayers appropriately. Instead of praying, God, please give me a better portion of health, or please help me have more income so I can pay my bills better, or whatever particular prayer you may be praying in those moments. Instead, look at it more specifically with regard to God's plan for your life. God is not wanting you to pay your bills. He's not opposed to you paying your bills, obviously, but that's not his goal for you. We ask anything according to his will, he hears us, John writes in 1 John chapter 5, verse 14, I think it is. He hears us if we ask the things that are according to his will. And his will, of course, for us is always spiritual. It's always heaven-centered. And so the prayers that we offer, while it's perfectly appropriate, of course, to pray for our daily bread and similar earthbound prayers that we might pray, what we do more than anything else is pray that we find faith in this moment. Pray that we find purpose in this moment, that we are able to show the grace of God in our lives. We can show the power of Jesus in our lives, that we can be patient and kind and loving and committed to Him in all facets of our life, no matter whether things are going good or bad, no matter whether the answer is yes or no. That kind of an example can be a powerful influence on others, whether in the church or outside the church. And it can embolden us to face, sorry to put it this way, even worse circumstances if they may come up. Because we know that no matter what it may look like in the short term, God loves us. God is lifting us up. God is in control of the world. He is worthy of us handing over the controls of our life to Him, and ultimately He will reward us, if not in this life, then certainly in the next life, because we have been found faithful in these moments. So if your day doesn't get better, if your day gets worse, please don't lose faith in God. Trust that God is, in fact, watching over you and blessing you, and that heaven is your home. That's your prayer. Thank you very much for following along. God bless.